I want to be clear about what I do before I tell you what I did at the wicked property, because what I do is the context that makes this account mean something beyond a strange story from a strange man. I am 45 years old. I have been doing contract predator and nuisance animal control work for 20 years, operating across the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states for ranches and farms and private landowners who have problems that need permanent solutions. I am not a cryptid hunter and not a wildlife researcher and not someone with a television show. I am a working man who kills problem animals for money, and I've been doing it long enough that the work is as ordinary to me as plumbing is to a plumber. I grew up on a cattle operation in southwestern Virginia and spent my 20s doing ranch work before I moved into the contract side of things, where the pay was better and the variety of situations kept the work from going flat. My usual clients are agricultural operations with coyote problems, or feral hog infestations, or the occasional black bear that has become too comfortable around livestock to be safely relocated. I get contracts through state agricultural agencies when a specific predator has been causing enough verified damage to warrant targeted removal rather than general control. The work is unglamorous and practical, and I am good at it in the specific way of someone who has spent 20 years learning how animals move and where they shelter and what their habits are in different terrain and different seasons. I am not the kind of person who is surprised by the work. I have seen enough of what large predators do to livestock and property that very little in the field produces a reaction I did not anticipate. What I found at the wicked property in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, produced reactions I did not anticipate. I want you to understand that when I say that, I mean it with the full weight of 20 years that had not prepared me for it. The contract came through a law firm in Charleston, acting as an intermediary for a private client who wanted the work done without a direct, traceable relationship to the contractor. This was not unusual in my experience. Wealthy landowners used legal intermediaries for liability reasons. Estate managers handling inherited properties used them for administrative convenience. I had taken 3 or 4 such contracts over my career, and the work had always turned out to be exactly what the paperwork described. The contract for the wicked property described a large predatory animal causing ongoing harm to the property and surrounding area. It specified live kill, not live capture. It specified that the animal's remains were to be left at the site and not removed. It specified photographic proof of kill as the deliverable and included a confidentiality provision about the details of the contract. The fee was 4 times what I would charge for a large predator removal. I called the law firm representative, a man named Clifton, who handled all the correspondence. I asked what species the animal was believed to be. He said the client had not been able to provide a species identification, and that large predatory animal was the fullest description available. I asked why the remains were to be left on site. He said that was the client's preference and a condition of the contract. I asked who the client was. He said the client had chosen to remain anonymous. I took the contract because the fee was substantial and because in 20 years I have never encountered a situation in the field I could not handle. I will come back to that confidence. I want to address it directly before this account is finished, because it deserves to be addressed. I arrived at the Wicked property on a Monday morning in late October. Good timing for this kind of work. The leaf-off was beginning in the hill country, and sightlines through the forest were improving daily. The property sat at the end of a private road off a county route that ran through the kind of rural West Virginia country that feels remote. Not because anything has been done to make it remote, but because it is simply a long way from anywhere that attracts visitors. The road to the property was unpaved but maintained, which surprised me given that the farmstead at the end of it appeared to have been unoccupied for some years. The fences along the road were in good repair. Someone had been maintaining access to this property without living on it. The farmstead itself was a collapsed farmhouse, 2 outbuildings in various stages of deterioration, and a barn that was structurally sound but long out of use. The cleared land around the buildings, maybe 15 acres of old pasture, was reverting to scrub. The forest pressed in on all sides, the dense second-growth hardwood of the West Virginia hills, and the property had the feeling of a place that had been in the process of being reclaimed for a long time and had not finished being reclaimed yet. What I noticed before I had walked 50 yards from my truck was the perimeter, not the fence line. The property had a standard fence along its boundaries, in the same good repair as the road fencing. What I noticed was different. A strip of cleared ground just inside the forest edge, running along the interior of the property boundary at a consistent width of about 10 feet. The vegetation in this strip kept low and sparse in a way that did not happen naturally. Someone had been maintaining this strip on the interior of the forest edge, recently and regularly, without living on the property. I have been doing predator control work for 20 years. I know what a maintained perimeter looks like, and I know why you maintain one. You maintain one because you want visibility. You want to see what is moving along the boundary of a defined space. Standing at the edge of that cleared strip in the October morning, I thought about which side of the boundary the visibility was intended for. I walked the interior perimeter and found sign of the animal I had been contracted to kill. Large sign, larger than anything I had encountered in West Virginia before, and I have worked this state for 15 years. The sign was distributed consistently along the interior of the property boundary and did not cross the cleared strip into the forest beyond. In 20 years of working with large predators, I had never encountered one that stayed consistently within a defined area without physical containment. Animals moved where food and cover and range requirements took them. They did not observe human-defined property lines. Whatever was on the Wicked property was staying on it. There was a small community called Darnell, about 7 miles from the Wicked access road, a cluster of houses around a general store that had been there long enough to have developed the specific quality of a place that has outlasted its original purpose and simply continued. I stopped there for supplies and ended up talking with an old man named Chester, who was sitting on the bench outside in the October sun, doing what old men on benches outside rural general stores do in the afternoon, which is watch the road and be available for conversation. Chester was in his mid-80s. He had lived in the area his entire life, 3 generations of family before him in the same hills. He knew the wicket property the way he knew everything within 20 miles of Darnell, as a feature of the local geography with a history he had been aware of for most of his life. He asked what I was doing out that way. I said I had a contract job on the old wicket place. Chester was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what kind of contract job. I said predator control and left it at that. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who expected some version of that answer. He said the Wicket family had kept that property for 100 years before the last of them died out, and that keeping the property was understood by everyone in the area as the specific thing the Wicket family did, the reason for their presence in that part of the county. The keeping was deliberate and generational, passed from each Wicket to the next with the same seriousness that other families passed down land or business or faith. The last Wicket, an old man named Howard, who died about 4 years ago without children or close relatives, had maintained the property himself until he physically could not, and the 2 or 3 years between his becoming unable and his dying were the first period in living memory when the maintenance of the Wicket property had lapsed. I asked what the Wickets were keeping the property for. Chester looked at the road for a moment. He said the Wickets kept something on that property, had kept it for as long as anyone could trace back. The people of Darnell and the surrounding area had understood this for generations, understood it the way you understood a neighbor's particular habits, as a fact of the local landscape that you did not ask about directly because the asking would require an explanation the neighbor had clearly decided not to give. What he knew was that the Wickets kept the thing on the property and that the keeping required the maintained perimeter and the regular presence of a Wicket on the land, and that when the keeping was being done correctly, nothing bad happened in the surrounding area. I asked what happened when the keeping was not being done correctly. He said the 2 or 3 years when Howard was failing and the maintenance lapsed were 2 or 3 difficult years for the area. He did not specify what difficult meant, only that there were things happening in the surrounding hill country during that period that people attributed to the Wicket situation and that stopped when Howard died and the property passed into the care of whoever was managing it now. I thought about Clifton at the law firm and the anonymous client and the 4 times normal fee. I asked Chester if he knew what the thing on the property was. He said he did not know what it was. His father had not known and his grandfather had not known. The Wickets, in all the years the people in Darnell had lived adjacent to their operation, had never explained it. He said the explanation was apparently not the part that mattered. The part that mattered was the keeping. He said he hoped whoever hired me knew what they were doing. He said he hoped I did too. I drove back to the Wicket property and did not sleep well that night in my truck. I spent 2 days on the property before I found the animal. I am a thorough and methodical tracker, and the 2 days gave me a complete picture of the animal's movement within the property boundary, a picture that continued to trouble me professionally because the animal was not moving the way any predator I had worked with moved. It was not ranging. It was not hunting across the full available area. It was moving within a specific central zone, maybe 40 acres centered on the old farmstead. And the sign at the edges of this inner zone told me something about duration that I had not expected. The sign was layered, fresh, over older still, accumulated in the specific way of an animal that has been moving through the same ground repeatedly over a very long period. I have been reading sign for 20 years, and what I was reading in the inner zone of the wicked property was not the sign of an animal that had been there for weeks or months. The layering suggested years of continuous occupation of the same ground, possibly much longer than years. I found the animal on the afternoon of the second day, in the dense cover of the old orchard on the north side of the farmstead, where the apple trees had grown unpruned for so long that their canopies had merged into a continuous, low tangle of interlocked branches. I'm not going to describe it in detail. I have made this decision deliberately, and I want to explain why, because I think the explanation matters. It is not that the description would be unbelievable, though it would test the limits of what I could put into words and have those words correspond to what I actually saw. It is that describing it precisely would require me to give it a category, and every category I have available is wrong in ways that would give you a false picture rather than an incomplete one. And a false picture is worse than an incomplete one. I will say it was large. I will say it was unlike anything I had killed in 20 years of this work or anything I had encountered in any context. I will say it was aware of me before I found it, watching me from the orchard cover with a full and directed attention that had been present from the moment I arrived on the property, and that the quality of that awareness was the quality that people who have spent time in certain places have described, and that I recognized, even though I had no prior framework for recognizing it. The awareness of something that had been watching far longer than you had been the one doing the watching. I will say this also. It was not threatening me. It was watching me with the specific quality of something that understood what I was there to do and was waiting for me to do it. I have thought about that more than almost anything else since October. I did not take the shot that afternoon. I told myself it was because the light was going and the angle was not optimal, and I was a professional who did not take suboptimal shots when there was no urgency requiring it. Both of those things were true. They were not the whole truth. I went back to my truck and sat in the October dark and thought. I thought about the maintained perimeter and the layered sign and the 40 acres of movement within a property boundary that the animal had apparently respected for longer than any animal respected a boundary without physical containment. I thought about Chester's word, keeping. I thought about what a wicket did on that property for 100 years and what Chester said happened in the surrounding area when the keeping lapsed. I thought about the difficult years. In the morning, I walked the property again, all of it, including the outer zone between the inner 40 acres and the forest edge. I was looking for something specific, and I found it. The outer zone, the band of property between the animal's inner range and the maintained perimeter, showed no sign of the animal. Clean ground, as though the animal had drawn its own interior boundary and was staying within it. But the outer zone showed something else, something I had not been looking for on the first 2 days. Along the inner edge of the cleared perimeter strip, at regular intervals, there were posts, old wooden posts, unpainted, no wire between them. serving no agricultural function I could identify. Old enough that the wood had silvered completely with decades of weathering, but upright and sound, maintained the same way everything else on this property was maintained by whoever was doing the maintaining from a distance. And at the base of each post, worked into the soil around it in a way that was subtle enough that I almost walked past the first two before I understood I was looking at something deliberate. There was a specific arrangement of the ground, not anything I can categorize, just a disturbance of the earth in a consistent way at the base of each post, the kind of thing you would notice only if you were looking for it, and possibly not even then. I stood at the fourth post and looked back toward the farmstead where the animal was somewhere in the orchard, and I understood something that I had not understood before. The property had been set up to maintain a specific relationship between the animal inside and whatever was outside the boundary. The posts and the outer zone and the maintained perimeter and the animal's presence in the inner 40 acres were all part of the same arrangement, each element in relationship to the others. The wickets had not been simply containing the animal. They had been using the animal's presence to anchor something. I drove to the county seat that afternoon and went to the library and asked for historical records on the Wicket property and the Wicket family. The librarian, a woman named Ruth, who had been at that library for 30 years and who treated the county's historical records with the specific seriousness of someone who understood they were irreplaceable, helped me find what existed in the archive. It was thin, but it was consistent. The Wicket family acquired the property in the 1880s from an estate that had been in legal limbo for decades following the death of its original owner, a man named Garland, who came to that part of West Virginia from somewhere to the south, built the farmstead, and died childless and intestate after about 30 years of occupancy. His nearest identifiable relatives declined the property when they were located, which was unusual for the period, and it sat unclaimed until the Wickets acquired it. There was a local newspaper account from the late 1890s describing a period of unusual animal predation in the surrounding hill country, livestock losses, and a quality of disturbance across the farms and homesteads along the valley floor that the paper attributed to large predators moving out of the deeper hills. The account mentioned in passing that the disturbances began to subside after a period during which the Wicket family undertook extensive work on their property. There was another account from the 1930s describing a similar period of disturbances that again resolved after the Wickets addressed something on their land. 3 periods of disturbance in the recorded history of that area: the 1890s, the 1930s, the years when Howard was failing, all of them associated with periods when the Wicket operation on the property was not functioning correctly, all of them resolving when it was. I drove back to the property and took the shot the following morning. I took it from a position I had scouted the previous afternoon, in good light with a clean angle. It was a good shot. I am a professional and I do not miss, and the animal went down in the orchard and I approached and confirmed the kill and photographed it for the deliverable. I stood over it for a moment after confirming. I have killed a great many animals in 20 years, and I do not usually stand over them. It is not a practice the work requires. I stood over this one because I was not certain I had done the right thing, and standing over it for a moment was the only acknowledgement I knew how to make of that uncertainty. Then I walked back to my truck and drove off the wicked property for the last time and sent the photographs to Clifton and received the payment within 48 hours. The contract was closed. The job was done. I have spent the 4 months since trying to understand what done means in this context. The title of this account says, "They did not tell me why." And that is true. And I want to tell you what I believe the why was, because I have had 4 months to assemble it, and I think I have the shape of it now, even if I do not have every detail. The anonymous client wanted the animal killed because the animal had been on that property for a very long time, and whatever its presence had accomplished in terms of the relationship between the inner zone and the outer zone and the posts and the surrounding hill country, the client had decided that relationship needed to end. Not relocated, not managed differently, ended. The kill order and the remain stay on site provision and the confidentiality requirement and the 4 times normal fee were all in service of a specific and deliberate termination of the wicked arrangement. Someone wanted the arrangement over. What I do not believe is that whoever wanted it over fully understood what over would mean for the surrounding area. Or if they understood, they had their own reasons for wanting it anyway. And their reasons and the reasons the wickets had spent 100 years on that property were not the same reasons. And the difference between those 2 sets of reasons is currently being worked out in the hill country of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. I have been watching the county's agricultural extension reports and the local social media accounts and the county sheriff's public incident logs since October. The things I have been watching for have been appearing. Livestock losses distributed across a radius of about 15 miles from the old wicked property. Individual incidents being attributed to coyotes and feral dogs, and in one case, a black bear, which was a reasonable attribution for individual incidents, and an inadequate one for the pattern taken together. I know what a coyote depredation pattern looks like across a 15-mile radius, and that is not what I am reading in the aggregated reports. I have been talking to Chester. I called him 6 weeks after the contract closed and asked how things were in the area. He said things had been a little strange since October. He said it in the flat tone that I had come to understand as the tone of someone describing something they have a long history with and no remaining capacity to be alarmed by, but that they wish was not happening. He asked what I had done on the wicked property. I said I had completed the contract I was hired to complete. He said yes, he had figured. He said he hoped whoever hired me understood what they had started, because in his experience, the wicked arrangement had been keeping something out of the surrounding hill country for a very long time. And without the arrangement, the thing that had been kept out had no particular reason to stay out anymore. I asked what the thing was that had been kept out. He said he did not know. He said the wickets had never explained that part either. He said the area had a history that went back before the wickets and before Garland, before the first settlers in the valley, a history that people who lived there had never fully documented because documentation required explanation, and explanation required a vocabulary that nobody had ever developed for what was in those hills. What the Wickets had understood, and what Garland before them had apparently understood, was that the thing on the property was something the other thing did not want to be near, and that keeping the one kept away the other, and that arrangement had been worth maintaining for over 100 years, because what the other thing did when it was not kept away was worse than the cost of maintaining the arrangement. I said, "Whoever hired me to kill it, do you think they understood this?" Chester said he thought they understood the animal needed to be killed for reasons of their own. He said he was not sure their reasons, and the Wickets' reasons were the same reasons. I sat with my phone for a long time after that call. I drove back to Darnell once since October, in January, on a cold, grey day when the hills had the specific closed-in look of winter hill country. I sat with Chester on the bench outside the general store, and we looked at the road and did not say much. Before I left, Chester said one thing that I have been thinking about since. He said the Wickets always knew the arrangement would end eventually. Howard had told Chester once, in the last years when Howard was still getting around, that the arrangement had a natural life tied to the thing on the property, and when the thing was gone, the arrangement would be gone, and what came after was what had always come before the first wicket arrived and what had made the first wicket necessary. He said Howard had not seemed frightened by this. He had seemed resigned, like a man who had done his part of a long job and understood that the end of his part was coming, and that what came after his part was not his responsibility. I asked Chester if Howard had any idea someone was going to hire a contractor to speed up the timeline. Chester said he thought Howard would have found it neither surprising nor particularly important. Howard's view, as best Chester had ever understood it, was that the thing was going to end when it ended, and the surrounding area was going to deal with what came after, and that people had dealt with it before the Wickets and would deal with it after. I drove home through the January hills, and I have been thinking about that ever since. I want to say several things to close this account, and I want to say them directly, because I think directness is what the situation requires. To anyone in predator control or nuisance animal removal or any related field where contracts come through legal intermediaries with anonymous clients and fees substantially above the normal rate for the work being described. Ask why live kill rather than capture before you sign. Ask why the remains must stay on site. Ask who the end client is and what their relationship to the property is and how long that relationship has existed. Ask whether there is a history to the situation that predates the current problem description. In my experience, the contracts with the 4 times normal fees and the anonymous clients and the remain stay-on-site provisions are the contracts with the longest histories, and the longest histories are the ones where what you are being hired to do is not the beginning of the story and is possibly not going to be the end of it. Ask why. Ask it specifically, and do not accept a version of Clifton's answer, which is that the client prefers not to say. The why is the whole of it. The what is just the mechanism. I know that now, and I did not know it in October. And I wish someone who had been where I have been had written this account before I took that contract. to anyone who lives in rural areas surrounding properties that have been in single-family ownership for a very long time. Properties that appear to be maintained by people who do not live on them. Properties with a local reputation for being kept rather than worked or used in any obvious way. If that property changes hands, or changes its management approach, or goes through a period of apparent neglect, pay attention to what happens in the surrounding area in the months that follow. Pay attention to livestock and to disturbances in the hill country or the surrounding land that do not quite add up to the animals they are being attributed to. Pay attention the way the people of Darnell have been paying attention for generations, with the flat, practical awareness of people who live adjacent to something they have never fully understood, but have learned to read the signs of. The signs that Chester knows are the same signs his father knew and his grandfather before that, going back to the 1890s and the newspaper accounts about unusual predation in the valley and the Wickets undertaking extensive work on their property and the disturbances subsiding. I know those signs now. I know what they indicate. I wish I had known it before October. I completed the contract. I closed the job. I drove away from the Wicket property with the photographs on my phone and the payment in my account, and 20 years of professional experience that had not included any category for what I had just done. And I have spent 4 months building the category from the outside in, using Chester and the library records and the agricultural reports and the specific quality of the January hills when I drove back to sit on that bench. The category I have built is this. Some arrangements are older than the documentation for them. Some of what looks like a property management situation or a nuisance wildlife problem or a livestock predation event is a piece of something that has been managed by the people living closest to it for longer than the official systems have been paying attention. And the management works because the people doing it understood the terms of the arrangement, even when they could not explain the terms in any language the official systems would accept. Howard Wicket understood the terms. He maintained them until he could not, and then he died, and the property passed to whoever Clifton represents. And whoever Clifton represents had their own reasons for wanting the arrangement ended and the means to hire someone to end it. I ended it. I am watching what that means for the hill country of Greenbrier County. I am talking to Chester. I am not going back to the Wicket property. There is nothing on the Wicket property anymore that constitutes a reason to go back. That is the part that I think about on the bad nights, when the January cold has become February cold and the agricultural reports have another cluster of incidents that do not quite add up to coyotes. The Wicket property is empty now. What the Wicket property was keeping is not.